Today we have the fabulous Tamryn Sheriffs, and some of you will already know Tamryn if you've been in the Well Chef world, you've been a Well Chef in the making for a while. You might have seen Tamryn on the stage at one or maybe even two of our FFU lives. Tamryn's been in the Well Chef community. She's a massive contributor to it. She's an amazing wealth creator. She teaches incredible strategies to people all the way from creating their own digital businesses and really how to use physical property as amazing aspects to your addition to your wealth journey, both from a cash flow and building assets. So I'm excited for today, some juicy topics. So thank you, Tamryn, for your time, for coming on in. I'm not going to give you any more intro besides I love this woman to bits. She's also in a mastermind with me. She has such integrity and alignment, and she's worth listening to. There's so much here. So I'm going to shut up for once, you see, and handing over to you.
Hello, thank you so much, Anne, and hello everybody. What a delight and a privilege to be here with you. I have had so much fun preparing this session and going back into my photos and my memories and reliving some of my experiences around Airbnb, which is the focus of this session. So thank you so much for listening. And I'm just sure that you're going to be inspired to find what the right path is for you. For those of you who don't know me, I use a fantastic model called Rent to Rent to have an absolute party on Airbnb. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. But I'm also going to be sharing with you the way that I started, which was actually in my own house. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that that's ready to share. So as I was saying, I have the funnest time ever using property and Airbnb. And there's actually quite a lot of ways that you can go about your own Airbnb adventure. And we're going to take a deep dive as a special behind the scenes for you guys into two of those today. But if you haven't met me before, I'll just give you just a tiny little insight into who I am and what I'm about. I've been hosting on Airbnb for just over 10 years. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it actually started with a spare room in my own house in Cape Town, South Africa. And from there, it has grown into a number of different strategies, two of which I'm going to show you today. And one of which is the one everybody is always curious about, which is called rent to rent. Rent to rent is when you lease a property or you rent a property and then you sublet it with everybody's knowledge and permission. And that is my favorite strategy. So I started out as an absolute beginner with a room in my house. But all these years later, I have quite a portfolio of listings. And although it's not even the end of this year, we haven't even had our high season. I'm based in South Africa, which means we have like up to a quarter of our revenue come in over December, Jan, Feb. I already have a business much bigger than when it was just in my spare room. So if you are watching, I just want to let you know what we are going to do and also what we are not going to do. We're going to take a deep dive into two case studies of my own properties. When I started out with my own guest room and one of my rent-to-rents very near my house. I can literally walk to it in a couple of 100 meters. And what we're not going to do is get into the nitty-gritty of how to do that and how to set it up and how to buy furniture and all of that stuff. But there is a masterclass that you can sign up for. The link will be shared if you want to get a proper dive into the 7 sessions. But it's quite rare for me to go through the numbers, and that's what we're doing here. And I want to just take a moment then to talk about this idea of non-ownership as a real opportunity from a property perspective. Because when people think about property, they usually think, okay, I've got to save up, I've got to have a deposit, I've got to apply for a mortgage, or some kind of funding or finance from a bank, and then I can either have a long-term tenant or a short-term tenant doing short-term rental. That's another term that you'll use. It's actually the official industry term for doing Airbnb is short-term rentals versus long-term rentals, which is usually the kind of property strategy that people think they need to have. They need to think they get a mortgage and then have a tenant. But there is this interesting little space of non-ownership where you get beneficial use of a property through a lease, or maybe even another space that you're already using for yourself that you can share. And it's a kind of an underrated, maybe even forgotten opportunity about how to get on the property ladder without having to make sure that you have perhaps the credit record to get finance. And I'll even share with you how through this method, you can build up a credit history inside of a company or even in your own personal capacity that you could actually get finance at some point down the line. And that's actually what I've done over the last few years. So as I mentioned, my journey started with my love affair, let's say, with Airbnb started actually in 2013 as a guest. And then through a series of bizarre incidents and in the moment panics that I had to come up with a plan about covering a double rent, I landed up with this strategy. So in 2015, to tell you a little bit of detail about that, I had a lease in my own little cottage in Cape Town in Hout Bay, and the lease came to an end in the end of December, like literally, Old Year's Eve, which is the worst time to try and find a new long-term lease. I'm talking about where I actually lived. I was renting. So I knew I needed to start my quest for a beautiful apartment long before, and I started looking in like September. And by the time it came to, I think it was early November, I had found the perfect spot, but it was available from December 1. So that was my kind of my spark. And I in that moment, I said to the landlord, look, I really don't want to miss this place, but I also really, really, really don't want to pay double rent for the December. And I had been really inspired as being a guest already in Airbnb, and it was in the front of my mind that this was a thing that people were doing. And I said, hey, Jonathan, how about I take the lease, I'll sign it, but just to cover that double lap in lease, I put it on Airbnb. And like as if I had just suggested the most normal thing in the world, he said, sure, it doesn't bother me. Go ahead. As long as you're paying your rent, it doesn't make any difference to me. So that's what I did. And I thought I had invented something brand new, but it turned out actually it was a very established model called rent to rent, or sometimes called master leasing. And from there, I got in such a frenzy. I wanted more. I set that place up. Bookings started coming in, even though the December period hadn't arrived yet, that I even suggested to my husband, why don't we have people in our own house? And he was like, okay. And at that point, I lived in a little cottage that had 2 ensuite bedrooms, and we literally never even had a guest in our ensuite bedroom, and we were young and we didn't have kids, and I used to love to travel. So that's what we started doing. And I had been really inspired by my own travels. I love to travel. I'd been in the States. I'd stayed in other people's apartments, and I'll show you a couple of those pictures during the case study. But I knew how special it felt to have like an anchor, like a tether to a host family when I traveled. So that's what I did. And that was my starting point to having people in my own house. And as the years passed, that bug bit more and more and more. And I knew that master leasing was a thing. And I started taking more and more leases. So that is the very long story short of what I've been up to. And what I want to do is take a dive into 2 of my favorite stories. So a deeper dive into that first cottage, plus one of the rent-to-rents that I have literally in the same street as my house now. So what you're going to learn about me is that I like to make everything as easy as possible, as simple as possible. And that means I'm not going to describe things. That means you're going to have another job. There's actually, currently, I have no idea who's staying in any of my Airbnbs, when they're coming, when they're going. I have a very high level overview, but everything else is managed by my team. So it doesn't mean that if you get into this industry, you have to be hands-on. You really, really can build something that allows you to have the freedom. So you can always rely on me to find the easiest, fastest, simplest path. So just to take a dive into the in your home option. Now, you might be thinking, how on earth is that possible? I would have to do a major spring clean. I don't want any strangers in my house. Where would I put them? There's actually lots of variations of how you can have somebody in your own home. And in those pictures that I have there, is literally a transformation that happened in one morning of a bedroom, where if you can just make sure that the linen's changed and something shifted, you can actually very feasibly have somebody in your own house. And what is wonderful about Airbnb specifically is that it has its origins in the home sharing and the sharing economy, which means things like Uber, where there's a space or a car or a bedroom or a house that's not being used. Technology allowed us to be able to share things. And before Airbnb, there was even a platform, which is probably still active, called Couchsurfing, where it was a movement where people would be able to say, hey, I'm going to be in Berlin and I'd love to sleep on your couch. And people were hosting each other as part of this sharing economy. So if it's a brand new idea to you, it's something that you might want to consider. It really suits people who are in a phase of their life where they'd really like to host, like to share a glass of wine, like to share their city, like to be somebody's anchor. And you can, no matter if you're in the most restrictive city in the world, because some cities have got restrictions on how many nights you can have space on Airbnb, your own space, you can still use it as a cash flow strategy to be able to supplement your income. And that is exactly what I did when I had just come back from a trip in the States in 2016 to Denver, and I stayed in a couple's apartment, Katie and Eric. And I just felt so held and so connected, like I was staying with old friends. You can see there, I was so in awe that they had left a little cork board with my name and all the things to do. And I remember drinking morning coffee with them and just feeling like, you know what, I'm not in a strange place. I'm not in any danger. I'm in my friend's room. And as I started telling you earlier, I returned back to Cape Town and was so excited about this idea that I managed to convince my husband that we could do the same for people. And we did. I got back and I listed just an ensuite bedroom, called it Quaint Ensuite and Well-Traveled Couples Cottage. And I was very selective. I didn't accept everyone. I blocked my calendar when I didn't want anyone. And the kinds of reviews that I got from those guests were, Tamryn was like an old friend. She shared her favorite secret insider tips of Cape Town with me. And most of the people, I didn't do it for long because, as I mentioned, that lease was coming up to an end. I am still in contact with a lot of those people today. And this was already quite a long time ago. And at that time, just to jump into some of the numbers, I rented that little unit of that exact listing, and it came fully furnished. So I had absolutely zero setup cost. All the linen was provided. I was already paying for the space, and I was doing it really out of excitement and out of hobby. And for that first month that I put my guest suite on, I made basically my rent. And I was like, this is amazing. Now, of course, if you did it for months and months on end, you could decide what it is that you want to do with that cash flow. Maybe you want to invest it. Maybe you want to use it for a travel fund. Maybe you want to use it to cover your rent. Maybe you want to use it for whatever it is that you want to use it for. But for me, if this is the model that you choose where you're actually acting as a host, there's a greater idea. And it's not just about revenue, but it is super lekker to have the revenue. So as I say, I went back kind of looking at all, pulling reports and having a real trip down memory lane, putting this together for you guys, and just put some ideas together of what you could actually use this in your house strategy for, and how in the context of the greater wealth chef world, you really have an opportunity to say, look, this is my salary, these are my expenses, I don't have any money to invest. Like, that's actually a nonsense story when you think about what do you have. And in the same vein of this idea, there are people who go away so that people can stay in their house. That's very popular in the neighborhood that I live in. There is a student of mine who lives in London who loves to host only female travelers. She likes to have the company of global, solo female globetrotters, and she likes to give them a base in London. So there really is an opportunity here if it feels something that you are called for. And it is the most obvious starting point because you already have everything there is around your primary residence. So that is why it's one of my favorites. I don't often do this anymore. Sometimes if I am traveling, I do have my primary residence on just because I can't resist it. But I haven't had somebody in a guest suite for many, many, many years. But I really, really do recommend it as one of the no-brainer options on how to start. So that's that. And you can just reflect on what I've said. Make sure that you may be capturing some of your questions for the end, because I'm super happy to hang around and answer them. And what I'm going to jump to next is, if we talked about the beginner strategy now, I'm going to jump right to the advanced strategy. And again, let you just see what that looks like from a numbers perspective. But I do want to warn you that it is an advanced strategy. So if you are starting out and you just started to notice your excitement and your curiosity, don't think, oh my gosh, this is like way out of my league when you look at what a rent-to-rent looks like, because this is what happened for me years and years and years later after I had built up my experience, my track record on Airbnb, and my confidence and my business acumen. But I do want you to see what is possible and what it can mean for your life and what it can mean for your freedom and your ability to make decisions because you have cash flow available to you. And that's why I chose this as the second thing for you to have a look at. And the one that I'm showing you is my favorite, one of my favorite rent-to-rents, and it's in the exact street that I live in. And it was a house that I had watched being renovated, driving up and down every day, seeing the progress of this house, getting a nice garage put in and an apartment on the top. And I was super, super curious. And one day I drove past and there was someone I didn't recognize standing in the driveway. And me being me and me knowing that opportunities need to be seized when they present themselves, I stopped my car and I rolled down the window and I said, I haven't seen you here before. And he said, well, I'm the property owner. And I said, fantastic. I would love to look at your property. It looks like it's nearly finished. So then and there, I hopped out the car and he gave me a tour. And one of the projects that I have actually is a little school. I do homeschooling, and I was actually looking for a property for my kids' school. So that's my motive of why I stopped. But as Shedden was taking me around the property, I started seeing Airbnb logos in my eyes. I was like, he'd made a 2-bedroom apartment above the garage, as you can see in the picture there. And then he had made the main house, which had been completely renovated. And then he had added on like a big, huge master bedroom at the back, which I was instantly converting into a separate unit. So then and there, while I was standing with him, obviously rent-to-rent was already in my field of awareness, and I had already had the knowledge and the confidence about it. I said to him, Shedden, I would love to take a lease on your place. In fact, I'll take a 5-year lease. And he was planning on renting it privately. He wasn't even going to use the agent. He was like, I've landed in heaven, absolutely. Let's just get into the details. And we did a bit of negotiating and we signed. And then I got into my favorite phase, the setup phase, where I got to scour Facebook Marketplace. I love to buy all my things secondhand, and I've got a little strategy where I drive around like a lunatic and pick everything up in a trailer and pack it into the garage, and that's what you see there. And I give myself a very short period of time. I did the full setup of that space in 2 weeks, from signing of lease until first guest, and became very successful very quickly. So I'll jump into some of the numbers. And I'll also share with you how this space is not only about numbers, it's in the same street as my house. And I used the word beneficial use earlier. I get to use these spaces I get to use them for my friends and my family when I want people to come and visit. And that exact garage that you're looking at is actually converted into a little school area for my kids because they are homeschooled. In fact, we have a collective, so there's 8 kids. There's a little painting corner and a pottery corner, and the guests get to use it, and my kids get to use it because I have a very specific niche for my Airbnbs where I attract families who are traveling with their kids. So, of course, it's a business expense for my guests, but it's also something that myself and my family can benefit from. And that's the kind of creativity that you can also consider for yourself if you did want to choose this model. So I'm going to show you year 1 because it factors the setup costs. And then I'm going to show you year 3 so you can see what it can look like over time once you've paid off whatever it was that you used to set up. So I'm going to jump into that. And then, as I say, you may have tons of questions after, and I'm here for it. So year 1, I'll look at the setup cost. That setup cost includes the first month's rent. This property I rented on year 1 for 30,000 Rand a month. And I've put the dollar amounts for those who are international. I had to pay 2 months rent deposit. And then I needed to get some furniture on Facebook Marketplace. So in total, you can see there on the setup costs, I've given you the USD and the rands for those who are South African. And that I used finance for because I'd already been running this company for a while and they know my model. So I just say to them, hey, I'm starting a property, and they're happy to finance. So you can see there it's financed at an amount that I need to pay back every month, and I factored that into my cash flow. And in this case, I gave myself 24 months to pay that back. Then on average, the income and the expenses, you can see in year 1 already, even though I was paying back my monthly payment amount, I was getting what I call a freedom amount. I'm not calling it profit because you could be using it for something else in your life or in that business of, almost 14,000 Rand or like $800. And what I was doing with that amount was making something called the activity room for my guests, where there's facilitators that my guests can use, and there's equipment, and basically funding my homeschooling project for my kids. But if this was your property, and remember, you're paying off your investment amount, whether you borrowed it from yourself in terms of your saving, or you borrowed it from a bank or another investor, there's lots of opportunities for that. Then you can think about what are you going to do with the extra cash flow in your business. You can put it into another property. You can use it towards your family like I did in legit but creative ways. Or you can take it out as profit and then obviously pay tax on it and use it. So that's what happened in year 1, which is quite remarkable considering for a business, this is a business strategy, a cash flow strategy. To have profit in year 1 of a business is actually pretty cool. But then what happened a couple of years down the line, once that initial investment amount was down, is that the freedom money, the potential profit at the end, gets bigger. So the income had also increased in this business because I had got a better track record. I had got good ratings. The property had some traction on Airbnb. It was getting recommended. It had reviews, so I could increase the rates. Now, the rent did go up a little bit because that's normal in a long-term lease. And I obviously stabilized and tried to manage my expenses as much as possible. So in year 3, when I wasn't paying back my initial investment, the freedom money, what I can do with the cash flow, became much bigger. So in that case, funding more facilitators, ramping up my activity room, attracting more families, all the while I consider this property my school child education funding vessel. And if you allow yourself to ponder and dream, there's something perhaps close to your heart that you could think about setting up a property for a specific purpose, because that is how I always do it. Whenever I know, okay, there's something I want to add to my life, like I'm just about to start homesteading, then I start looking, okay, what project can I set up that is literally, in my mind at least, designed to fund the cash flow of that project. So this specific one, which is called Monkey Mansions, because there are lots of monkeys around and it's a playful space and it's for families. Its purpose is to be able to provide for families what I want for my family and for us to share it, the beneficial use of it, and for my kids to be there every day. So that is another example, completely different than in your own house, but what it can look like down the line in the rent to rent strategy. So I'd love to pause there, hand over to any questions. I saw Anne's taking some notes. I'd love to be able to help and answer and get your creative juices flowing.
Oh, thank you, Tamryn. I mean, this is really the key thing, to start asking these questions, getting these ideas, because, well, I think you'll know, I often will call it property Play-Doh. You know, I think real estate property is so powerful because there's so many different ways you can wrap a contract around it. And what I love about the rent to rent is it also changes our mindset that we always have to own, that we have to, and so to shift, when we're thinking about our wealth creation, it's about who gets to control the asset rather than necessarily ownership. And so it's just expanding the way we view possibilities, and that's what's at the core. Besides, this is so sexy, and I love, if you get to know an area, you don't necessarily, maybe you don't want to own more, but you can add this cash flow. So one of the key questions the observations was this again, a mindset, a way of thinking, how do I get an asset or a cash flow machine? Because we can talk about, is the rent to rent an asset in a pure form? It's not. It's a cash flow machine. How do we get cash flow machines to pay for our lifestyle? Versus so many people's thinking is, what do I earn? I pay for lifestyle, and then let's see what's left to create wealth. And I think this is such an important wealth paradigm, is we first go, no, can I create an asset? Can I get an asset? And they pay for lifestyle. Because now you're not putting that burden, and you're creating these beautiful streams. So thank you for that. As you said, something new happens in your life. Your first creativity is, what can I get that's going to pay for that? As opposed to, oh my God, I've got to work harder, it's going to come from me. It's a completely different mechanism, and then it can keep expanding. So really key on that. So you made a point about the fast setup on this one, and I think it's a very important point.
Yeah.
And maybe you could dive into it, what it is from your side as to why. I've got my own hallucination as to why that's also important, and maybe some of the trips or the hooks that I see, or the traps I see people falling into when they do any kind of rental, long-term, short-term, whether they own the property, whether it's a rent to rent, in this setup stage. So could you talk about, the way you approach setting up the property? Because that it's a short-term rental.
Well, and it depends where you are in the world as well. But I also like to set up a property in November, because our high season, we're in South Africa, is about to hit us. And I like to know that when I'm stacking on, if I'm taking my money from somewhere else, whether it's from myself, from somewhere else, or from finance, that the high season is about to come, and you get a huge chunk of your annual revenue in over those periods. And usually by the end of the high season, I'm at zero. That's usually what happens. Fantastic. So actually that just all cancels itself out. And then I'm like, there's no stress, and I start. So that's one of the reasons why the setup is fast, is that once you've signed a lease, you've got expenses. And I don't like to have expenses that aren't covering themselves. So once you know what you're doing, it's actually very simple and very easy to set up a space. And obviously property and property staging and laying out, if you're getting into that space, and you're feeling attracted to it, it's because you've got some eye for it or some interest in it. So it is genuinely my favorite part. I love looking for secondhand furniture. I love imagining how it's going to go in the space. And that is, that's part of the reason why I do it, other than the cash flow, is that I get to have that fun, creative play. And I'm doing it fast because I give my, you've heard of this principle that the complexity of a task will expand to the time that you allocate it.
Yeah.
If you've heard that before, I think that's called Parkinson's law.
Yeah.
So if you give yourself 2 months, it'll take 2 months. And if you give yourself 2 weeks, it'll take 2 weeks. And that's just.
And you'll add, not just the time, but as you say, the complexity. You were like,
yes,
oh, we can deliberate and
you
overthink.
Can. And I also add another layer for myself, but that isn't something that you have to do. And I know lots of hosts who don't do it, is that I have to use what's available during that 2-week period on Facebook Marketplace. So the style of the place ends up being dictated by what I can find in that period. So I can take myself off the hook that I'm making some kind of theme. I'm making what's there.
I love that. Give ourselves boundaries, give ourselves limits, because it comes back to endless options is not freedom. It often is just overwhelm. And I love that. It's like, I'm going to do it in this. And so I hope you all heard Tamryn fits out her, all with pre-loved, secondhand, whatever you want to call it, furniture from Facebook Marketplace, from WhatsApp selling groups, from what's available.
Sure. And sometimes you get lucky. The space that I'm sitting in now which is not the one that I showed you. I have my office in a beachfront property that I also have as a rent-to-rent. And for that one, I found someone who was selling everything in their house down to the teaspoon. So I didn't even have to do any driving around, and he delivered it. So one of the units here arrived, sheets, pillows, couches, teaspoons, plastic, Tupperware, everything. So that can happen too once you kind of know what you're looking for and the stars align and the timing is right.
Do you set any kind of fit out budget related to what your revenue can be? So what are kind of thresholds that you look at? Because again, this can be an area, as I see so many people just lose it. It's so easy, like, oh, I've got to have the tax of X, Y, and Z.
Look, I think it again depends where you are in the world and what niche you're in. So I have a program called Airbnb Starter Kit where I go into a lot of detail about this, but not every Airbnb is a luxury Airbnb. You have budget Airbnbs, you have mid-scale Airbnbs, and you have luxury Airbnbs. And personally, I like to play in the mid-scale range. Mm-hmm. So it's actually the ratio to your rent. So if I'm going to set up a place, I don't like to pay more than 4 times what my monthly rent is to get the whole thing done. So that's also another game, like a game I can play. Like, this is what I got, and I find that fun. And I think anybody can see the game in it and kind of see it as a gamified process. And it's not about buying for yourself, like, oh, I need this piece. I love this chest of drawers. It's about moving the Tetris pieces with the time you've got and the money you've got.
I love that. And so I think in life, when we give ourselves these frameworks, we're just able to make decisions, move on. So I love this. So no more than 4 times the likely rental that you'll get based on your occupancies, your voids, and so on.
Yes, exactly.
So brilliant, really key bits of advice there for many aspects of life, not just your rent to rent. So in terms of rent to rent, Shada says she assumes you've got to get agreement from the property owner or the person you rent from to rent. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
So you're very upfront right from the beginning. I'm definitely not recommending you doing any skullduggery, sneaky stuff. You'll be surprised that there are a lot of, because usually the first objection someone has is, why would somebody rent to you and let you rent it out? But if you think about it, a long-term tenant uses their stove every day, uses their bath every day, doesn't do deep cleaning once or twice a week, whereas a short-term rental, it actually is normal to be occupied half of the time. That means there's only people in that space half of the year, which means the appliances are used half of the time. And every time a guest comes and goes, so let's say every 2 or 3 days, a team of people arrive and scrub it like nobody's business because we're getting scored on how clean our place is. So for a property owner, it's actually a really good thing to have a short-term rental company.
Maintenance is there.
Your space. They want it to be spick and span and shiny and take care of all kinds of small maintenance. So Yes, they need to know about it. And there are a few extra things that you put in your lease around it. So for sure, you need to ask. There will definitely be people saying no, but I actually personally have never had anybody say no to me.
I
So,
suppose
yeah.
get the skills and like as I say, as you provide in your Airbnb training, how you also approach the landlord or the property owner is also really if you exactly that saying
Yeah.
why short-term rentals better, show your
Mm.
reviews, this is what it's
Mm.
going to be used for. So that really can help
Yes.
them see that really
And it
key.
compounds. Yeah, it compounds over time. So my more recent rent to rent was very easy because I could show them what I'd been doing. I showed them my company. I showed them my other spaces, and they're like, they actually can't believe such a good tenant comes out of the woodwork because we look after the space. And they phone one of my other rent-to-rent landlords and they can't throw the lease at you fast enough. But obviously when you first start out, there's some things you can do to give yourself credibility, and that's the kind of detail that I teach about.
Brilliant. Emma says, does for your own property, all these properties, do you need to pass any kind of survey or thing before you can put it onto Airbnb?
No, it is surprisingly simple to start out. The most important thing that you need to know is how to take good photographs and how to be really clear with what's on offer. Because what's unique about Airbnb, as opposed to some of the other booking platforms, they're called OTAs, online travel agents. Airbnb is a platform that has its roots in home sharing. So I've literally seen people offering tents in the garden on Airbnb. And the name Airbnb comes from air mattress on the floor. That's the origin of the company. A guy who stayed on an air mattress on his friend's floor and was like, this is a thing. So you can absolutely start fairly simply. There's a couple of important things you need to know, but you don't get approved. You just do it well, and then people start booking.
Yeah, it's so interesting that aspect around proper light and photographs because sometimes I'll go onto an Airbnb and they've the sites and they're showing me this highly curated photograph close-up of a flower petal and I go, I don't give a shit about the flower petal. I want to know where I'm going to
I want to
sleep.
see. Yeah, exactly. And it's very important that what you show is what you get, because that's actually what the rating is about. It's not about if it was 5-star in the sense of luxury hotel. It's, did my experience match what was said was going to happen, even if it was your couch. Yeah.
Love that. Emma has said, okay, she can imagine letting a room in your home can lead to some problems with shared space. Do you recommend things like access to private kitchen, bathroom, laundry? What are some tips that you've learned around renting a space in your own home?
One of the things about Airbnb specifically that's not unique to other platforms is a double rating system where you as a host get a score and you give your guests a score. So you're not just having any strange person that you don't know. You can go and look, you can have your settings done that you approve people or not, and you can go and read what other people have written. And if someone's been on Airbnb 10 years, there's lots of people's opinions about what they were like as a guest, and they get an actual score out of 5. So if I was sharing in my own home, I would have my settings that I'm definitely only doing that. Like I did, I was very picky and choosy with my little cottage in Cape Town. And then you get to choose who comes. So that's the first very important thing. And then from that, you get to choose how much of your house you're sharing. I've stayed in other people's houses where all you're renting is the room. You're not renting access to any other space. And I've stayed where you can use the kitchen or it's a room with actually a separate entrance. So it's not automatic that there's going to be things you have to worry about because you're curating who comes and you get to decide. There's no right or wrong or about what you have to do.
So Emma, I think this is often so important is when we start any new thing, one of the most important questions is just to say, am I willing to, what are I prepared to? Because if you also want to make this sustainable and joyful. and not begrudging. Because if we start building up resentment in any aspect with our business, with our partners, with things on, then resentment is always a really good indication that we haven't had our own back, that we haven't been clear on what we are and aren't willing to stand for. So I think this is a lot more about going, what will help it be sustainable for you? So something that you would want to keep doing and getting that cash from versus like, oh God, no, this is happening, because that's just going to be shit and it's not going to then be sustainable. Then there's no point in doing that. Like some people love that whole shared space. Me, nah, I don't want to, I wander around naked. I don't want to walk around and see if, different rooms. Thank you. You got to know yourself what you can maintain.
Plus, if you are using a space that you already have or you already have access to, it's very low commitment. You choose when the calendars are open. It's not like you put it on Airbnb and then now for the next 10 years, you're hosting people. You decide, I'm going to open that weekend and I'm going to close everything else. And then you can just do it once and you can be like I was, this is amazing. How do I do more? Or you can be like, I'm so glad I tested that out and I'm going to move on to the next strategy in the Airbnb strategies ladder.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about the team you built up, because obviously you've started just with, it was you and doing the booking, the managing, and with time, as you say, you've now got a team. I see a question here, say I run a Airbnb in Umhlanga, just down the road from Tamryn, and my biggest nightmare is check-in and check-out due to people flying in late. Do you use a key box or a full-time housekeeper? But I think there's a wider sort of just conversation around how to know what are maybe the key team members to bring in that you found in a progressive sort of stage. Obviously, it depends on individuals, but talk about outsourcing and support.
Yes. So, just about the check-in and check-out, you also get to have it how you choose it. I don't allow check-ins after 8. That's just the rules. And if you can't do that, then you can't book. And if you book and you didn't notice, then it's Airbnb's problem and they have to find you another place. So Airbnb is very supportive of what your rules are. So that's a non-issue. I don't think my team or me should have to have anything to do with check-ins after 8. But obviously there are people who do allow that, and then you have something called a little lockbox where they can get their key and they can go in and out, and that's a strategy. So in terms of team, the components are someone has to speak to the guests, someone has to prepare the space, and someone has to process the linen. And you can make some kind of configuration of that. So my personal...
that's great. Let's repeat that.
Yeah.
Prepare the space, communicate with the guests,
and make sure you got the linen. Yes, because everybody's got a surprising hidden activity that you don't know, and the real activity related to Airbnb is linen.
Yeah.
So whether you're sending everything to a laundromat or you've got your own little production, that has to be happening in between. And the way I've got it set up is that I have a bookings manager who does all the guest communications. So she receives all of the bookings. I'm also at a place now where I do take direct bookings. So she sends out the quotes and she sends out all of the comms. And then at each property, because my strategy is that I like freestanding properties that have multi-use. So there's usually 2 or 3 units on one property. I have a live-in housekeeper there on the property, and they handle all the linen and they meet all the guests. But there are unlimited configurations of how that can work. And
I love that, getting clear on the different categories. What are the roles,
yes.
Communication, preparation, and cleaning and linen. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
There's a question around how much marketing do you need to do to get sufficient bookings in Airbnb? Okay, Nikki, that's an interesting question, but I think could you just speak a little bit about marketing? Because obviously that so depends on, if you've got a shitty storage unit that you're trying to rent out in the middle of a desert somewhere with no aircon. Your marketing spiel might have to be a lot harder than somewhere else. The thing, but if you could talk about the marketing.
Airbnb itself is a kind of marketplace. So the service that Airbnb is offering you is in what's in the marketing world called the traffic. So they are the ones bringing the guests, and you are one of the people in the online shop that they can choose. So a marketplace. And for that reason, you can have an Airbnb if you're doing all the things right that you need to do on Airbnb. And there are things where you're not doing any additional marketing. And I was like that for years, where Airbnb was my traffic source. And that is a good first step for most people. And then as you evolve away from Airbnb, you start putting yourself onto other platforms. Some of the famous ones are booking.com, and there's many, depending on where you are. There's some local ones in your own country. And then you use those as additional traffic sources. And then ultimately the goal is that you move away to take direct bookings where you have your own website, and then you are building an email list and have an Instagram account, and then you are not taking your bookings off of those platforms and you're not paying them booking commission. So that's what the journey looks like. And I'm in that space. But when you start, and for years, you can stay just on Airbnb.
Yeah, great. So there's a few more questions. A few more of you have asked again about, clauses in the lease. You said most lease agreements have not a strict no subletting clause. How to go? We did discuss this, but you did mention that absolutely right up front. When you're negotiating a lease, you're not pretending you're not going to do it. You have those conversations. So do you then tend to go with your own template of a lease?
Yes. I have my own tip, because sometimes it's new to an owner, even if they're open to it. But first things first, if I'm even inquiring on a property, it's my opening line. I'm a company, I do this, see if your owner's interested, So you're not like pretending and then like surprising anyone. Yeah. It's the thing from the beginning. And then I use my own lease template, which you always negotiate about. And at this point, when your leases are big, I mean, I have some leases that are 3 times the one I showed you in the case study. Then you're having Zoom meetings and saying, take that out, add that in. Yes, but I need you to replace this, fix this, do that. So you get into, you'll be surprised that a lot of property owners are used to that kind of dance before you sign a lease.
No, absolutely. And I think when you also come for yourself approaching it as a business, know what's needed to make it work. They do. And so it's a lot of real estate property. It's to not get attached to the specific property. As you say, you look around, it doesn't meet criteria. Get attached to the outcome of what it creates. Get attached to the experience, the cash flow, the result. And you then stand for that rather than trying to win somebody over. If a deal's not going to work, it's not going to work. Walk away. You don't want to be in a situation that you're moving. There's always another deal in that. So really getting clear on what your requirements are, I think, is just so key. Great. How do you choose the right area? What kind of market research do you do before deciding that that's the property you want to either use, buy, rent to do this?
Well, there are tools. There's online tools, and I can even send you guys some free tools that are out there that gives you a lot of very important data. You need to know how many nights a year your space is going to be booked. That's called your occupancy rate. You want to know how much you can charge people, your nightly rate. And with those 2 things, you can make informed decisions around what your threshold of your expenses are prepared to be. And there are, like I say, quite a few tools that you can put an actual address in, and it'll give you those estimates based on what it can see happening in listings nearby. So yes, you definitely do your research. And I've also got a whole bunch of spreadsheets and templates that I use. If I'm going to pull the trigger on a very big decision, like my beachfront property had intense setup costs and, a high monthly rental and double deposit, I sat doing my numbers, extensively in my spreadsheet. And then you can make a confident decision. It doesn't mean that there isn't the exhilaration of the uncertainty while you're setting it up and getting your first booking. That's always going to be there. But
I love the fact that you get the delight in that, as opposed to you say the exhilaration of the anticipation. People go, all the anxiety of it. Isn't it so lovely? You can give it whatever name you can give it, whatever meaning you want it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why, and again, you can do things to mitigate. Every area's got a high season. If you don't want to sit with that exhilaration for too long, make sure you open just before high season. And in the area that I'm in, the chance of you not being 100% booked over high season is 0. It's that we just can't host enough people. Yeah,
it's amazing. And so coming back to if you choose to rent out a room in your home or your own home in those kind of areas, do you have some advice as to like personal stuff, what you should clear out, what you shouldn't have, or is it just sort of?
It's literally anything goes. I personally like to make sure there's nothing personal out. Like I said, I do put my own primary house on Airbnb from time to time, and my primary house has multiple units. So I even had a season where I was very fascinated with tiny house living and I wanted to experiment with it. So I moved myself and my family into the smaller unit on our property and did all that fun exploration with stairs that have got cupboards. And if you've seen tiny houses, there's lots of cool carpentry that can happen. And we lived there for a full year. And during that time, my main house was on Airbnb. And while it was on Airbnb, I like it to be like a short-term rental. I don't like anything personal in my own way that I operate. But I have stayed in Airbnbs where the family photos are up on the wall and there's a big cupboard that says private, and you know that it's got their underwear and everything else in there, and it's normal. So there is no right and wrong. There's just this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm telling you I'm doing on Airbnb. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that is key. That as you say, match the expectation. That's always that. I think just a good marketing principle. I think you said, what sort of commissions does Airbnb take?
So it's actually literally changing as we speak. Historically, you had two options. You could choose it where you made your guest pay, which is what I did all these years, and I only paid 3%. And Airbnb are changing that from the 5th of December, where the host pays everything and the guest pays nothing. So if you use Airbnb, you'll see that. But obviously, I've adjusted all my pricing that it absorbs that. So what my bookings manager had to do was just go and add on 15% to all my nightly rates, because now I need to pay for it.
Okay, that's interesting. So really key to look at that commission structure, that pricing in on that. So just coming back to getting different teams and different people to work. I know there are also, I think what was key, I'm just seeing this question around cleaners. There's some stuff like the booking can be done completely virtually. That could be a VA in the Philippines or wherever. They don't have to be geographically located.
No.
The person who's communicating with or the booking, the communications, giving them advice. But obviously the making sure the room and setup and cleaning and the linen has to be geographically based.
Yeah.
You get these Airbnb companies that handle...
You do. And that could be your opportunity if you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, I'm not ready for my own space. I'm not ready for rent to rent. How do I put my toe in the water? The person who has a hosting agency is someone who handles all of that for a commission. It's usually about 20%. It depends where you are, but you could manage someone's bookings, do marketing for them.
That was an interesting point. You said typically around about 20% of the rental.
Of the nightly rate. So if somebody...
of the nightly rate. So you need to understand your cost structure.
You do, yeah. I mean, it's possible that you could have a rent-to-rent strategy and use an agency and still just get the cream, but that personally wouldn't make sense to me now that I have all my systems in place.
Yeah. But it could be an interim whilst you're getting your systems in place, getting it ready, and then say, okay, I'm going to replace it with find my own team. So it could be a transition strategy.
Yes, if you're doing rent to rent, or as I mentioned, the masterclass that you can watch has 7 strategies, and one of them is you be the host. You do that for other people.
Okay, great. Could you tell us a little bit more? Because obviously we only had limited time, and we've got a link here for that. So
yes. So there are 7 creative ways. We've spoken about 2, and we started hinting at others. And what I do on that masterclass is take you, like I did now, through the 7 of them, all of which I've tasted. Some of them I don't do anymore, but I know how to do. And I recommend that you come and you kind of have your notebook, and I'll ask you some questions and you can make a decision around which one is right for you. And then I also share in more detail what my team ingredients are, because I talk about the 3 clever ways to not have to do your own work. which is a perpetual mission of mine. And that means a virtual assistant. You started talking about that. And for many years, I only met my virtual assistant in person, I think, after 2 years of working with her. And she was speaking to the guests and handling all of that stuff and hadn't even seen the spaces. She had a template, so what I call a guest communication guide, where she's got to answer, some predetermined things that I set up. So it can get very hands-off, and it can scale to huge places. I mean, I know people who have rent-to-rent portfolios of 100 properties.
Wow. And very cookie cutter, as you say, there's a communication plan.
It can be. And there are people in South Africa with huge portfolios like that. I've got 2 small kids. I'm all about how easy can my life be. I like to curate and keep it in a way that I'm having fun setting it up, and I get to buy things on Facebook Marketplace. But you could have a completely different mass scale version of the same systems that I use and that I teach, and that's also on the masterclass.
Great. So we're going to have that second session. So click that link. So Jay, do you have any good advice around property management services? So we've spoken a bit about that, but also, would you consider ever doing this in a place where you don't live?
Yeah, well, I did actually have in Cape Town, and then I left Cape Town and moved to the north coast of KZN, and I carried on setting up spaces in Cape Town. So yes, I would, because you don't have to live there if you have your systems in place and you've got the right people on the ground, and it's a hotspot area. So it's very, in fact, I sometimes even look at places in the States still now, where I'm like, there are Facebook communities where people are promoting their properties all the time because they know that this is a good model for people to look after their property. And I run my numbers and I dance with the idea. So absolutely, you don't have to be there, but it is useful in the beginning when you really are trying to figure out what's going on, to be able to drive down to your property.
Yeah, and just get a sense of that. So I think what's also really important here, you spoke about hotspot areas, and often people think in terms of holiday rental, Airbnb, but I really would encourage everyone to also think wider. And you mentioned the States, and I suddenly remembered. So some of you have met Dylan Frost, who runs an amazing Amazon wholesaler business and teaches people in that. But he also has a substantial Airbnb rent-to-rent portfolio. Some he owns, some he rents, specifically in commuter. So a lot of it is in Midwest, funny Hickville towns in the US. Sorry if for those of you in the US, maybe not allowed to call them Hickville towns. In South Africa, we call them like Maplota areas, where there might be mining or people come in. So there's migrant workers that need to come rent an Airbnb or rent for in the week and then move. And so there's always just this demand for short-term rental by companies and so on. Also think wider, what might demand be as they get to know, as you say, where families, it might be single migrant workers. It could be.
Ultimately, you will end up choosing a niche if you decide that this is a business that you want to grow. And my niche matches my life. So I love to travel with my kids. And when I can't travel with my kids, I like to host people who are traveling with their kids. So that's actually got a term. It's called world schooling. So my niche is world schooling families. Very specific. But you could be anything. You could be business, you could be eco, like making sure everything's eco. There's so many different little niches that you can choose. And then when you get to the place where you're taking direct bookings, you are just occupying that space in a way that's so obvious that people want to use you. But that can take you years. You really don't have to do that in the beginning. Yeah.
Well, this is, as always, just thank you so much. I hope this has sparked possibility if you want to create additional cash flow, if you want to see how you leverage something you already have. As what Tamryn started off is right at the beginning, this is about saying there's no excuse not to have that additional cash flow to pay for some lifestyle, to blitz that debt, to get more money into your asset drawer. There's some really great ideas of how do you squeeze more without having to own, control, add more, take on costs. And so I hope this really inspired that you know about that as well. So Tamryn also just teaches all these strategies, provides all the templates, mechanisms around that as well. So we'll be sharing that. But hopefully this has really got your juices flowing. And Tamryn, as always, thank you for your generosity and your time.
Such a pleasure, such a privilege to be able to share something that I have found so much joy and fun and excitement in. And if you notice that little spark happening for you too, it means there's something about property and spaces and places and travel that's calling you, and you can find your version of that excited feeling that I get when I'm setting up a place.
I love that. And let go of the stories of, well, I can't have it because I don't have the money. We just remove that as well. And this whole different way of viewing how do we get money and things serving us so we live that life. And you do, you really exude that. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Can't wait to see you on the masterclass. And I hope you're going to get out there and create those cash flow machines. Bye.